Prologue. Lexie held the letter from the safe deposit box with trembling hands in front of her. This age-marked envelope contained the secrets they had been looking for. The sound of tearing paper filled the room as she ripped it open and carefully unfolded the paper inside. The contents of the box were everything they had been hoping for, and more. "Do you know what this means?" she asked after reading the letter aloud to Jay. Her eyes were glistening with unshed tears, while her cheeks were wet with the countless others that had already fallen. Jay nodded silently, in shock at what she had read. "We know who my parents are now. Your grandpa was wrong, just like we thought," he managed to utter after a moment, his voice thick with emotion. The cold rasp of a slide being pulled back on a gun echoed through the room, bringing them back to reality. "Is that really something the two of you should be worrying about right now?" Jay stilled, as next to him Lexie barely dared to breathe. Slowly, they both swallowed in fear before turning to see who had joined them. Chapter 1. The front door of the house Jay lived in with his grandfather burst open as he rushed out, his feet slapping loudly against the wooden planks of the front porch. The door slammed shut behind him as it bounced off the house, cracking the glass of the small window inset near the top of it. He paid no mind to the blue sky completely devoid of clouds. Nor did he acknowledge the clean, crisp bite of the morning air that held hints of the new life that came with spring. James Refton, known to his family, and if he had friends as Jay ran down the pathway through their yard and to the sidewalk beyond. It was a warm, beautiful day, but he saw none of it. The eyes that should have been noticing the world around him were instead focused on the argument that he had just run out on with his grandfather. Emotions that were becoming harder to control every day warred against his self-control. The near-daily disagreements were the leading cause behind that particular difficulty. This marked the 10th argument they had had about Jay not going away to college that week alone. For the teen, it was a simple matter. He was unwilling to leave the old man and only family he had left alone. If only his grandfather would understand that. Sure, Jay had already graduated from high school, but the window for him to go to college was by no means near closing. He had spent the last 2.5 years taking care of his grandfather, and he wasn't about to stop now. He was only 20 years old. There was plenty of time left for him to continue his education at a later time. Who knew how much time his grandfather Jethro had left? His health had been declining the last few years. He had promised his parents that he would look after him, and it was a promise he intended to keep. He didn't mind putting his life on hold. Family mattered, and that was all there was to it. He understood why his grandfather considered it important, and what he was trying to tell him, he did. At the same time, his mind was already made up, and as long as it was just the two of them, it wasn't going to change. He wished they could just let the entire matter drop. In his opinion, what his grandfather was asking him to do was leave him all alone and abandon him when he needed someone there the most. At one time, years ago, college had been an important part of his future. That was before the accident that had taken the lives of his parents. Like people would expect, such a loss had changed his way of thinking and what was important. It had changed his grandfather too. Before the accident, he had been a healthy 65-year-old man with muscle and energy to spare. Now, his health had taken a steep dive during his junior year of high school, and it only continued to get worse. His age had caught up to him with a vengeance, and the need to have someone watching him had increased at the same time. He was determined to be that person. They had no one else, and couldn't afford an in-home nurse. Even if the stubborn old man wouldn't admit it, they had limited options. Jay knew that all Jethro wanted was for him to have a life of his own. Under the surface of their arguments concerning college were the hints that told the truth. Jethro did want him to go to college, but more importantly, he wanted his grandson to live his life. Only he knew how much Jay had put his life on hold. Even before the accident that took his parents, he had been doing it. Now, he had been doing it for so long that it was easier and didn't even seem important. When he was younger, he had rationalized that he would eventually get to something when the time was right. The time was never right. Originally, he had started the process because they were constantly on the move. His parents' work took them all over the country. At times, he thought they almost seemed to be running from something. Jay was always the new kid. Eventually, he grew tired of trying to make new friends or even meet people when they moved. It was easier that way. Now, he had one more thing to focus on while putting his own matters on hold. His grandfather's health. It was clear that if it kept declining as it had been, then he wouldn't have long to live. It was a truth that Jay refused to lie to himself about. Until that sad day he became truly alone in the world, he would wait. He was good at that. The rough cobblestones of the path changed to smooth concrete as Jay reached the sidewalk in front of the house. He kept running, feet pounding against the ground as they carried him away. There was no destination in mind, only the desire to escape the conversation that awaited upon his return. He was near the edge of a small neighborhood park when he saw the old man looking blankly up at the sky. It was a sight that tugged at his heartstrings, and he found himself wandering over to him. "Are you all right?" Jay asked as the older man remained unmoving. "That cloud just looked like something I thought I recognized." Unfocused eyes turned to Jay, a glimmer of madness showing within the dilated orbs. Turning away, he began to mumble to himself. He could be the one, right age, and there is something familiar about him. Jay backed away, upon registering what he was mumbling about. The words sending alarm bells ringing through his mind. "Right, well, I'm glad that you are." He wasn't sure of how to finish that sentence. There was clearly something wrong with the elderly man. The only thing he could say for sure to have established was that he was alive. It was not exactly a high bar he needed to clear on that one. The mumbling stopped, and an arm flailed about as he tripped and fell to the ground in confusion. Jay rushed back to him, as he didn't want the barely coherent man to hurt himself. He had lived with his grandfather for long enough to know just how fragile older people could be. The barely coherent man groaned and blinked. His eyes focused on Jay's face, as the cloud of confusion in them lifted for a moment. With a quick move that belied his obvious age, he grabbed Jay's arm in a firm grip and pulled him closer. His eyes never left Jay's face. "It was you. I found you, I really finally found you." He mumbled under his breath, the words barely making it to Jay's ears as they drifted away on the wind. The young man held back the desire to escape and leave the mentally ill man on the ground. Instead, he helped him to his feet. "I'm all right, no harm done." He gave Jay a quick grin before continuing. "Follow me. I want to show you something." The old man's grip changed slightly as he struggled to straighten his back, pushing back against the stoop that had developed. His back cracked repeatedly as he straightened, struggling to come to his full and imposing height. He was tall, very tall in fact. Normally, Jay didn't think of himself as short or tall. He was a fairly normal height of just over 6'1", which was how he liked it. He wasn't so short that he got made fun of, nor so tall that he stood out. In his own thoughts, he was the perfect height. In that particular moment, however, he felt short. The wrinkled old man dwarfed him by at least 4 inches. The almost painfully tight grip on his arm changed again, as the man turned and tried to pull Jay along with him. It was as though the confused grandpa figure he had seen minutes before was nothing more than a lie. "Wait, hold on," Jay protested, trying to resist the firm grip on his arm. "Who are you? Where are you dragging me to?" Despite the strong grip on his arm, it wouldn't have taken much for him to break out of it. The problem was doing it in a manner that didn't result in his would-be captor's hand or arm being broken. No response was forthcoming to his question, and it had become abundantly obvious that the man wasn't in complete control of his mental faculties. Not that he was completely gone mentally. When he had spoken after seemingly recognizing Jay, the light had still been on in his eyes. Someone had been home for at least a few seconds when that happened. It wouldn't have felt right if he was to injure and then leave someone like that alone. Besides, Jay reasoned that he could take care of himself if anything happened. Not that he believed he was in any real danger. Without saying anything, he gave in and allowed himself to be pulled along. The pace was a slow and somewhat off-balance, stumbling gait that was the best the man in front of him could achieve. He would follow the elderly man and let him show whatever it was that seemed so important in his addled mind. If it was real. After that, he would try to leave, making sure that he got back to his home and grandfather, hopefully safely and in one non-axe murdered piece. If the two items were somehow one and the same, in that it was real and he was safe, then even better. Regardless of what would or could happen because he followed him, it at least gave him the opportunity to keep him safe. Plus, there was the side benefit that this little adventure was helping to keep his mind off the argument he had earlier with his grandfather. Jay found himself being pulled across the street and into the front yard of someone's house. Skirting the side of the blue-painted 2-story structure, they entered the backyard of it and then another house. From there, he followed along as they crossed one street after another and wandered through an ever-increasing number of yards. He was rather impressed by the stamina the old man seemed to possess. They had been walking for well over 10 minutes, and the person he had taken to be a weak, frail man of advanced age didn't seem to even be out of breath. It was only when they walked into an open garage that Jay began to question his decision. Before he could think it over or feel any misgivings, he was tugged inside the house. Finally, he was beginning to realize just how far gone the man was. It was too late to do anything by that point, as the man stopped and looked at the landing above them. his grip on Jay's arm tightening as the teen looked up. A striking brunette, who looked to be in her late 20s or early 30s, stood above them, looking down in shock at the intruders in her home. Her eyes focused on Jay as she cocked an eyebrow and shot him a questioning look. The old man started walking again suddenly, the painful grip he had on Jay's arm pulling the unwilling young man along as well. Jay shouted a quick "sorry" over his shoulder as he was dragged through the house and into the backyard. A beautiful back patio spread out under his feet, dotted with wicker-made chairs. Green grass trimmed to near perfection could be seen in the cracks of the patio before joining fully with the rest of the grass. The painful stranglehold grip on his arm eased and lessened before disappearing entirely. Swinging his now freed arm in relief, the muscles twinging gratefully as fresh blood flowed into them. Standing back, out of reach, he watched as the old man sat down in silence, the sun-heated wicker chair flexing underneath his weight. Jay glanced back to the house and then to the man, deciding it was unlikely that he was going to get back up right away. He needed to go and apologize to the woman inside before she decided to call the cops on them. Going to jail for helping someone was not on the list of things he wanted to accomplish in life. He had only just turned completely around when another younger beautiful brunette flew out the door in her rush. "Grandpa!" she screamed, bounding past Jay with great long strides that would have been impossible for anyone not in shape. He could only stand there stunned as she passed him without a second glance. "Lexie!" he breathed out in a disbelieving mumble, spinning around to watch her. He shook his head at the ridiculous thought. Still, the more he looked at her, the more the image from his past intertwined with the young woman in front of him. He hadn't seen her in years, but he was increasingly sure that it was her. She had been his best and most mysterious friend growing up. Somehow, she always showed up whenever his family moved. Each time she did, they would just pick up where they had left off like no time had passed at all, in the way only kids can. The last time he had seen her was 7 years ago, when he was 13 and she was 12. She had been his last and only true friend. Not a day had passed in those 7 years where he hadn't wondered what had happened to her. If she was all right, how she was doing. She had always been a cute girl growing up, but seeing her as an adult for the first time was something else entirely. She had a slightly rounded face, with shoulder-length hair in the front, while it tapered out shorter in the back. Her eyes had always intrigued him. They were the purest hazel-colored eyes he had ever seen. No matter what she wore, they would change to match her clothes without leaving a hint that they had ever been any other color. Right now, they looked violet, mirroring the color of her shirt. All told, she couldn't have been more than 5'2" in her flat purple Converse shoes. She rushed to the old man and grabbed him around the neck in an angry and desperate hug. It was something she could only accomplish because he was still sitting down. "Where have you been? We've been trying to find you all morning. We were just about to start making calls to the police and hospitals." She questioned him angrily. She didn't wait for a response before turning to face Jay. "And you," she paused, a confused frown flickering across her face as she finally realized who he was. "Jay?" Jay read her lips more than he heard her say his name. She was so quiet. "Hi Lexie, it's been a long time. How have you been?" he said as nonchalantly as possible, all the while freaking out inside. "How have you been? Really?" Jay berated himself, mad that he hadn't come up with something better. Anything would have been better, he thought. He couldn't have told her she looked beautiful, or just simply given her a hug and remained silent. Her eyes widened and began to water as she heard him confirm her suspicion. It was the first time she had spoken, much less seen her friend in years. "What? Why? How?" She shook her head before he could respond, and started over. "Thank you for bringing him home. I hope he wasn't much trouble. Where did you find him?" She simultaneously thanked and implored him, ignoring for now what she really wanted to know. Namely, how had he been, how were his parents, and more than anything else, how was he here with her now? Jay knew that she wanted to ask him more than that. The aborted questions and look on her face told him as much. It wasn't the right moment for their reunion. That would have to wait a little longer. He was a little slow on his own response, as he was too busy taking her appearance in. She was gorgeous, and her skin had a healthy glow to it. More than anything though, after not seeing her for so long, she seemed nothing short of perfect. Before Jay regained the use of his tongue that he was struggling to keep in his mouth and respond, her grandfather interjected on his own. "Quiet for a minute, Lexie dear. I have something that I need you both to hear, and then something that I need to show you as well." He paused, looking incredibly excited about whatever it was that he had to say. Lexie turned her attention from Jay and focused on her grandfather once more. "Lexie, He paused once more to grasp her upper arms in both hands to make sure that he had her full attention before continuing. "Lexie, this is your brother," he finally blurted out explosively, his head turning to Jay as he did so. Chapter 2. Nobody said anything. Jay shook his head and gave an awkward laugh. What had he really expected? The man was clearly crazy after all. Regardless, seeing how serious the old man was as he spoke nearly caused his mind to go blank in momentary panic. It didn't matter that what he had said made absolutely no sense at all. Jay was an only child. Only child, as in without any siblings. Lexie was his best friend, or at least she had been. They had only just found each other again, literally moments before. Lexie twisted her head to look at Jay, her face mirroring his own in a twin mask of blank, disbelieving surprise. Both were wondering what the heck was going on inside her grandfather's addled mind. She quickly dropped her gaze to the ground in front of her and focused on her shoes. Bringing a hand to her face, she covered her eyes in shame and to avoid Jay's own searching eyes. She couldn't hide the embarrassed blush that stained her cheeks and spread down her neck until it enveloped her arms as well. Her grandfather released her arms, and without any sign that he had seen their reactions, stood. His eyes were focused on a corner of the backyard as he motioned for them to follow him. He walked quickly off the patio and onto the grass. Lexie finally raised her head, letting the hand that had covered her eyes fall at the same time. The color of her eyes had morphed into a violent and stormy shade of violet. There was a silent and almost heartbreakingly needy plea etched across her face. Despite their time apart, he could still read her silent cues. She was begging him to play along with whatever craziness her grandfather had in store. It was something she couldn't bring herself to ask him out loud, and he wasn't going to make her. Jay smiled and with a slight nod held one hand towards the backyard and the other to her. He was letting her know that he would follow her lead. They hadn't had a chance to talk or reconnect in private, but she was asking for his help. Regardless of everything else, he still considered her his friend and kindred spirit. Lexie wasted no time in taking his hand in hers and following closely behind her grandfather. Neither noticed when exactly Jay's thumb started to softly circle and massage the back of her hand. It wasn't until her pinky started to caress the inside of his wrist that Jay noticed at all. Lexie made no further move to acknowledge the action, keeping her eyes firmly fixed on her grandfather's back. To address it would mean also potentially talking about what her grandfather had just said. It was not a long walk. The backyard, while nice and obviously cared for, was still part of a small suburban plot. They were led to a fire pit that occupied the back corner of the property. It was tucked away from everything and angled just right so that it would be hidden from the house. Lexie's grandpa knelt next to the pit and almost immediately started mumbling to himself again under his breath. Lexie's hand tightened around Jay's as she witnessed this. Reaching into the pit, he began pulling up the rocks that lined the bottom and sides. Carefully, he set each one to the side of the hole, making sure that none fell back into it and onto his searching hands. Jay glanced down at the hand that was tightly gripping his own. The inside of his wrist already missing the caressing movement from earlier. Lexie saw the action and looked down at their joined hands. Her eyes were shaking as she looked up and met his for a second before hurriedly entangling their conjoined hands. A hint of red entered her cheeks, giving them color once more. Focusing on what was happening in front of them, they watched as Lexie's grandfather dug through the rocks. That he had something to show them was apparent, though neither had any idea what he might have buried under the pit. A shadow covered the sun for several seconds, as the previously clear blue sky started to fill with dark, heavy clouds. The temperature dropped a couple of degrees, and the sweet, earthy smell that always precludes rain began to fill the air. Still, the old man kept removing stones through it all. His hands not stopping, as he failed to even notice that it had gotten slightly colder and darker. Finally, he stilled, his fingers touching the dirt at the bottom of the now rock-less fire pit. A grunting noise filled the air as his arms flexed, and he struggled to lift whatever it was from an awkward position. Stepping forward, Jay finally thought to offer his help to the old man. He did not need it. Still, he moved back from the pit, grateful for the momentary distraction it had provided from the brunette standing by his side. The old man gave a final grunt and lifted a metal lockbox of some kind from the ground and dumped it unceremoniously at their feet. The unsecured and rusty lid flopped open with a groan from the equally rusty hinges as it hit the ground at an angle. Flakes of paper, dirt and bug remains spewed out of the opening. The inside was filled with the dried remains of insects and pieces of paper that had been mulched into several nests. Whatever he had stored in it was now gone, destroyed by the elements and hungry bugs searching for a home. Lexie's grandfather started ranting and raving at the sight of the ruined box. Words that were barely coherent flooded from his mouth. The words "too late" and "it's all gone" kept coming up. He stood next to the box, shaking his fists and ripping at his hair. He kicked the lid shut hard enough that the weakened hinges broke, sending the metal top bouncing onto the grass. All the while, her grandfather continued his incoherent ranting. The bouncing rust cover drew Jay's attention. There was something taped to the bottom of the lid. A single folded piece of paper was stuck there. Quickly, he bent down and retrieved the paper, taking care to not damage it any more than it already was. He showed the water and rust-stained edges of it to Lexie as he did so. A fat raindrop hit the ground beside Jay as he straightened. Quickly, he placed the paper in his pocket, being careful of the edges. The fabric of his jeans would at least protect it a little. Lexie grabbed her grandfather's arm and began to drag him back in the direction of their house. It was impossible to calm him down, and he kept pulling against her. "Do you mind helping out here? Help me get him calm, or at least back inside." She snapped at Jay angrily. "We need to get him and ourselves out of the rain." Jay grabbed the arm she wasn't holding as quickly as he could, shocked into the movement at her angry tone. They had to fight the old man for every step they took, as they forced him back towards the house. Rain started falling around them with a vengeance, soaking them before they had even made it halfway back to the house. The grass quickly grew slick, making them fight for every step forward. Standing at the opening of the house, holding the door open for them, was the same lady that Jay had seen on the landing earlier. She was shaking her head sadly, as she saw how they were forced to nearly carry the deranged man. Lexie and Jay dragged him through the door and into the house with a quick nod at the lady holding the door. Lexie led them through the house and into a bedroom, where they forced her grandfather down. "Hold him still. I'll be right back," Lexie demanded as she left the room. Lexie returned a moment later with the woman in tow. In her hand she held a couple of pills, and in her other, she had a glass of water. Jay tried to hold the struggling man still, as they forced first the pill and then the water into his mouth. His eyes were wide at what he was helping them do. Lexie joined him on the bed, taking hold of an arm as she did so. They continued to hold him, ignoring how wet and cold they both were. Finally, the old man quieted and fell back onto the bed. His eyes were glassy and unfocused as he continued to mutter softly to himself. Lexie released her grandfather and took Jay's shivering hand. "Come on, follow me. We need to get you out of those wet clothes," she told him, as she pulled him from the room and pushed him into another. "There's a shower through that door, and there should be a robe hanging on the door that you can use," Lexie said, pointing toward the door in question. "Get warmed up first. Then bring your wet clothes out when you are done, and we'll put them in the dryer." She finished speaking, and fled from the room without another word. Jay stripped as quickly as he could, and stepped into the steam-filled shower. Relishing in the sting it caused on his chilled skin, and the warmth that rapidly sank into the depths of his body. Despite that, he remained under the steaming spray, his mind going in circles. He wanted to go over everything that had just happened, but he couldn't bring his confused mind to focus properly. Jay stayed in the shower for another minute before giving up and shutting off the water. Putting on the soft blue robe that hung on the door, he wrapped his soaked clothes in a towel and left the bathroom. Stepping from the room, he followed their path from earlier, stopping when he saw Lexie standing in the kitchen. Lexie opened the refrigerator to her side when she saw him, and withdrew 2 bottles of water. Turning to offer one to Jay, she tossed it to him lightly at the nod of his head. Walking over to the counter and with a cute little hop, she sat on top of it, crossing her legs in front as she did. "So," she began, as she fingered the lid of her water bottle. "What was the paper that you found?" she asked, obviously ignoring everything else that had just happened. "Oh no, you don't," Jay told her firmly, standing there in his soft blue bathrobe with his towel full of wet clothes in hand. "Just wait for now, we can talk later," she told him softly, looking at her feet as she did. Jay swung the towel onto the counter with a grunt, as he dug through his wet clothes to find his pants, pulling out the damp piece of paper when he found them. "Lexie," Jay started, only to be interrupted as they were joined by a third person. Closing his mouth angrily, Jay carefully unfolded the wet paper beside Lexie's leg. "It got a little wet," Jay ground out pointlessly, feeling his jaw click painfully as he unclenched it to speak. Lexie sighed beside him. "Jay, I'm sorry. I know we need to talk, but later please," she pleaded in the same soft one as before, with a quick look at the lady that had joined them. "Now, before we do anything else, I believe introductions are in order," Lexie said as she hopped off the counter. "Jay, this is my Aunt Tracy. Auntie, this is Jay. He's the one who brought Grandpa back, as you know." "I'm really sorry about before," Jay interjected hurriedly at the mention of what he had done earlier. "I was just trying to keep an eye on him." I didn't mean to enter your house without permission. Tracy waved away his apology. It's fine. I figured it was something like that. He's been getting worse lately, so thank you for taking care of him. I'm just glad you were there to help. She focused her gaze on the paper Jay had spread out on the counter. Putting everything else aside for the moment, what is that? Jay looked at the paper before responding. I'm not actually sure. We haven't had a chance to read it yet. He looked over at Lexie as she joined him, her eyes on the paper. It looks to be an article of some kind, I think. I think that is French there at the top, and then English at the bottom. Lexie told them. It looks like a newspaper article from a French paper, Tracy said, peering over Lexie's shoulder, suddenly very interested. The English at the bottom must be a translation of what it says. Jay skipped the French section at the top, since he didn't speak the language, and quickly skimmed the translation at the bottom. It seems to be an article about a house fire that took the lives of a family in France. It says that the fire killed the mother and father, along with a young toddler-aged boy. Their daughter is alive and being treated at the hospital. Jay quickly summarized, feeling them both stiffen at his sides as he spoke. Where's the date? What does it say the date is in the article? Tracy demanded in a whisper, backing away from the counter. Jay saw her hand reach out and grab Lexie's tightly. Hold on, Jay began. It's dated 18 years ago, on the 20th of June. Lexie interrupted him, whispering now as well. Right. Jay agreed with her, stopping as he saw how they were both reacting to the article. Why does he have this? Lexie demanded as she turned to face her aunt. I don't know, she began to reply before Lexie spoke over her. I thought we got rid of all the articles he had on that fire, a long time ago. Tears were in her eyes as she spoke. I thought we did as well, obviously we missed one. Tracy said, looking at the wet paper with a puzzled look on her face. I don't remember this one though. Not only that, but what it says is slightly different from the others. Jay cleared his throat, drawing their attention before speaking. Can I borrow a phone while the two of you talk? I need to call my grandpa and let him know where I am. And maybe something with the address of this place as well. Lexie briefly perked up and then slumped as his words sank in. You're not here with your parents? Jay struggled to maintain a straight face at her innocent question. No, not this time. He answered her in a strangled whisper. Clearing his throat once more, he spoke louder. I left the house after having an argument with my grandfather. I sort of left my wallet and phone there when I did. I ran into your grandfather soon afterward and well. He trailed off with a shrug. Tracy's head shook lightly to side as she answered him. We don't have a landline here, so just use one of our cell phones instead. If you want to stay for dinner, then he is more than welcome to join us as well. She told him as her eyes flicked between his and Lexie's. No doubt trying to figure out what was going on between them. Is that all right, Lexie? She asked, focusing on her niece. Yes, Jay and I have a lot to catch up on. Lexie responded enthusiastically, jumping at the opportunity her aunt had given her. Tracy's eyes widened at Lexie's response. Your name is Jay? The name finally clicking in her mind, despite the earlier introduction. Jay looked at Lexie, puzzled, before replying. My name is actually James, but I go by Jay. Tracy's gaze turned to one of disbelief as she turned to look at her niece. Jay? As in the little boy you used to have a crush on. The same one that kept showing up wherever we moved. I thought he was make-believe, an imaginary friend or something. Lexie's cheeks reddened in embarrassment at her aunt's words. She didn't respond except to look at Jay from the corner of her eyes. Yes, I believe that would be me, and she wasn't the only one with a crush. Jay felt his cheeks redden as he spoke the words. He hoped that by admitting it had been mutual, it would help Lexie to calm down. As a kid, she had been his best friend and first crush. If they had remained in touch instead of losing contact, then maybe it would have fizzled out or changed into something more. Just seeing her again after all this time was doing things to his insides. Lexie shook her head lightly, her eyes firmly fixed on the floor. Her cheeks were blazing red as she reached into her back pocket and withdrew a cell phone. Jay took the offered phone, gripping it as far from her hand as he could. His stomach growing unbearably heavy as he did. They had too much to talk about to worry about that right now. Jay stepped from the room, accepting a piece of mail with their address on it from Tracy as he did so, and dialed his grandpa's number. Speaking quickly, he told him where he was. After telling him that they had been invited for dinner, he hung up and walked back into the now silent kitchen. Tracy looked from Lexie to Jay as he walked into the room. It sounds like the two of you have a lot that you need to talk about with each other. Why don't I wait outside for his grandfather while the two of you talk? Lexie and Jay glanced at one another for a second, before turning to Tracy. That would be nice, thanks, Aunt Tracy. If you don't mind doing that, I would be grateful. They replied in turn. Let me put those in the dryer for you while we wait, Tracy said, holding her hands out for Jay's wet clothes. Oh, thank you. It would be nice to wear actual clothes, Jay said, laughing as he handed the bundle of wet clothes to her with a smile. Tracy backed away from them with a grin and walked towards the front of the house.